Mixed Messages is a podcast by Bree Graham and Emily Madigan, two mixed women trying to navigate the complexities of living between multiple communities in these divided times. On today's episode, we're discussing a hot topic that has set this country on fire. Today, we're going to get into America's relationship with protesting. Let's get into it.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to give a trigger warning and a content warning for today's episode. We do talk about police brutality and violence towards people of color and towards protesters, so please guard your hearts.
Hi, friend.
Hi, Bree.
So originally I was going to be solo dolo on this episode, but here she is. She's here. So
I don't want you to talk about this by yourself or without me.
Well, no, there's no way I could tackle this one. Truly, I could not tackle this by myself. This is a doozy of an episode.
It really is. It's gonna be a thing.
So let's just
go ahead. Talk to me.
Jump right in.
What's up, Bree?
Okay, so in past, you have been the one doing the majority of the research, but we're flipping the script today because, again, I thought you weren't going to be here.
Yes.
So,
that was the plan initially.
So this May, George Floyd was murdered in our home state. His murder brought on a surge of protests throughout the streets and the world. And I'm not even being dramatic when I say that. In Cape Town, a group of South Africans protested outside of Parliament to show solidarity with George Floyd and with the Johannesburg resident Collins Kosa, who was beaten to death by soldiers enforcing COVID lockdown restrictions. In Kazakhstan, over 100 people participated in a protest holding up a sign reading, "I can't breathe." I'm talking Tokyo, Sweden, Spain, Mexico, Barbados, seriously, everywhere. On June 6th, an estimated 500,000 people joined protests in 550 places across the globe.
I think that's called pimping all around the world.
Oh.
No? This is not the right time. It's not the right time. Listen, I just wanted to take on the Bree role of coming up with song-related puns and jokes. That's wrong. You're right. I'm going to go back on mute.
Yeah, let's just... So, if so many people participated in these protests against police violence, why is it still a source of debate for so many Americans? In the U.S., our relationship with protesting can be traced back all the way to the Boston Tea Party, and a lot of the protests that have happened on our soil have actually led to policy change. The Women's Suffrage Parade in 1913 was the first national event for the women's rights movement. And while the 19th Amendment wasn't ratified until 1920, a ton of historians credit this protest for paving the way for change. We've protested civil rights, gun control, war, and even more importantly, sports, like football game losses and college basketball upsets, you know?
I mean, those are the most important reasons to take to the streets.
Just in case you haven't started to recognize our sarcastic voice, that was it. That was sarcasm. Anyway, Americans love protesting. So why does this protest specifically about police brutality seem so controversial? Honestly, I don't think I can answer that. Well, I could, but then I would spend the next 30 minutes cussing into the mic at a very high pitch, and I don't think that's what you came here for. But I can give you some things to consider. The first thing I'd like you to consider is the fact that our press is driven by attention, clicks, and raising the anxiety of its viewers. There's a theory that says if we protested with smiles and dancing and unity, that not much would get done, which, sidebar, is ironic because every single protest that I've ever attended has been exactly that, peaceful. But also maybe that's not ironic because not much has happened on a policy platform. Take, for instance, the March on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on March 7th, 1965, better known as America's Bloody Sunday. This march began like a lot of the protests of the civil rights movement. John Lewis, may he rest in power, led a march of 500 to 600 people out of Selma, Alabama, and started out peacefully. Sidebar. It is taking everything in me not to groan at the idea of protests being peaceful because the term has been used by so many anti-protesting Facebook trolls, and I will tell you why it annoys me in a second. So the protest was peaceful. until the group crossed the now famous Edmund Pettus Bridge, where the protesters encountered a group of state patrol troopers and local bullies. So behind the scenes, the local county sheriff, Jim Clark, had issued an order for all white males in the county over the age of 21 to report to the courthouse that morning to be deputized. The commanding officer, John Cloud, told the demonstrators to disband, and when the Reverend Hosea Williams tried to speak with the officer, chaos ensued. Troopers began shoving and beating protesters with nightsticks and assaulting them with tear gas. And it was all televised. Now, this attack on these protesters was a blatant display of racism on what would have otherwise been a very peaceful protest. But because racist people can't mind their own business, they would ultimately be the biggest advocate for the change that they didn't want to see. You see, because the attack was televised, the entire world got to see exactly what the Black community was fighting against, and it created change. President at the time, Lyndon B. Johnson, released a statement almost immediately deploring the brutality of, quote, Negro citizens, end quote, and sent a voting rights bill to Congress on March 15th. So it drives me crazy when people try to imply that protesting doesn't do anything. If we're going to go down the route of protesting not doing anything, then maybe we should take a look at a famous peaceful protest that arguably actually hasn't implemented change. I'm talking about Colin Kaepernick. Let's set the stage. The year is 2016. Kaepernick was super outspoken on social media over the murders and shooting at the hands of police of Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Charles Kinsley, and the acquittal of police in the death of Freddie Gray. It was preseason for the NFL, and the San Francisco 49ers were in their third game. During the national anthem, Kaepernick was sitting down instead of doing the usual stand-up with your hat off, hand over heart shtick. And at a post-game interview, Colin was like, look, I'm not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses Black people and people of color. To me, this is bigger than football, and it would be selfish on my part to look the other way. There are bodies in the street and people getting paid leave and getting away with murder. Between the third and the fourth preseason game, Kaepernick had a conversation with former NFL player and U.S. military vet Nate Boyer. The convo went something like this. I'm going to quote Nate here. I showed him a text from a good friend of mine who is still in Special Forces. And he said, Nate, I was just standing on the tarmac as a plane came back from Afghanistan to drop off a coffin that was draped in an American flag of one of our brothers. And I just couldn't stop looking at Staff Sergeant Thompson's wife and just seeing the grief and the pain. And I got filled with rage for anyone that disrespects what we are fighting for and what we stand for. And I showed Colin that text. And at that moment, I saw in his eyes, it really affected him emotionally, and it had a big impact on his next words, which were, I want to do something different. We came to a middle ground where he would take a knee alongside his teammates. Soldiers take a knee in front of a fallen brother's grave to show respect. He said, I think that would be really powerful. Yeah, that is really powerful when you introduce the levels of symbolism there. So Colin took a knee for every game that season. And boy, was there backlash. Even though then 49ers head coach said that Kaepernick was zero distraction that season, and Kaepernick's stats were arguably pretty decent, I'm not going to spend the rest of this podcast talking about Cap stats. Google that on your own time. The 49ers released Cap that March, and he hasn't played professionally with a team since. The implication being that he hasn't played because of his protesting. Outside of personal losses for Kaepernick, the NFL experienced an 8% decline in viewership, with a few surveys implying that the kneeling was the issue. Everybody's uncle had an opinion on how un-American this protesting was. Even 45 said, wouldn't you like to see one of those NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, he's fired. That's a direct quote. In 2018, when Nike created an ad that stated, quote, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything, end quote, hashtag just burn it started trending. I'd like to tell you that big institutional change happened after Cap got worldwide attention for the Black Lives Matter movement by taking a knee, but it didn't. Honestly, one of the biggest changes that Cap's kneeling made was almost making me a 49ers fan. Oakland Raiders all day, baby!
Okay.
Except now they're in Vegas. And honestly, what?
Okay. We will have our season about sports, Bree.
You're right. Anyway, I I will say that Kaepernick donated $1 million to organizations working in oppressed communities. He donated $25,000 to Mothers Against Police Brutality organization that was started by Colette Flanagan, whose son fell victim to police brutality. Kaepernick and his partner Nessa founded the Know Your Rights Camp, an organization which holds free seminars to disadvantaged youths to teach them about self-empowerment, American history, and legal rights. And in April 2020, the Know Your Rights Camp launched a relief fund for individuals impacted by COVID. So that's why personally I get pretty annoyed with people who tend to believe that protests should be peaceful. There's a catch-22 here, folks. The fixation on violence and looting over peaceful protesting is putting anti-protesting baby in a corner. You see, if you were one of the people saying that you're all for peaceful protesting, yet called Colin Kaepernick un-American for using his right to peacefully protest during the national anthem, what you're telling me is that it was never really about the protest, but it was about the subject matter, and in this case, Black Lives Mattering.
No, I can't. The hypocrisy, the ignorance, the blatant racism. It's like, just tell me you hate Black people and we can go forward from there. Because at least then I know where you stand. Don't beat around the bush and be like, it's un-American. Also, that's nationalism. Being like, nothing matters more than caring about our American flag. That's nationalism. That is so not okay.
2 hours later.
Caring more about symbolism and our country than the people who are actually make up the country itself. You ignorant trolls.
So somehow this particular issue has become politicized, with the Black Lives Matter organization, which, outside of raising awareness for the mistreatment of Black and brown people in the United States at the hand of police, is trying to get policies and legislation into effect to ensure that civilian rights are protected. Their opposition being the Blue Lives Matter group, which is trying to... Honestly, what is the Blue Lives Matter group trying to do? There really isn't an organizational website for Blue Lives Matter. Well, wait, let me take that back. There is a Blue Lives Matter NYC website, which upon further investigation, their mission is to raise awareness, help police officers assist each other, and provide comfort and support as they go through hard times. I don't know. To me, that sounds like a job for a therapist. Okay, all right, I'm sorry, that might be perceived as being mean, but I mean it. I do hope their health insurance covers the cost of therapy, and I hope that they're encouraged to go. Look, I'm not going to spend time defending police officers and speaking to the fact that their job is hard and underappreciated, or talk about how not all cops are bad, blah, 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 because that's obvious and it's true. But it is a job. While being Black isn't a uniform that anyone gets to hang up at the end of the day. And again, honestly, what is Blue Lives Matter trying to do? While you're pondering that, I'm going to move on to another topic: the looters, the rioters, the violence surrounding protests. I remember the Baltimore riots in 2015. I was working at Anthropology at the time, LOL, and I was at a restaurant and I sat at the bar on break. I wasn't drinking, just you get your food faster when you sit at the bar. I don't know. Anyway, I was sitting at the bar watching CNN's coverage of Baltimore and the upset over Freddie Gray's neck and spinal injuries that left him in a coma at the hospital. During the week leading up to Gray's ultimate death, riots were happening in the city. At least 20 police officers were injured, 250 people arrested, between 285 to 350 businesses damaged, 150 vehicle fires, 60 structural fires, 27 drugstores looted, thousands of police and Maryland National Guard troops deployed, and with a state of emergency declared within the city limits of Baltimore. I remember thinking, let them burn it all down. Similarly, 5 years later, with George Floyd's murder here in my state, I remember feeling a similar sentiment. Although it's much more jarring to drive past the flames and smoke in your own neighborhood. Not to nosedive too much into my personal Facebook activity, but I unfriended a lot of people at that time. Because I'm all for protesting peacefully, but the rioting and the looting, blah, 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 people just don't understand. I had a colleague of mine message me wanting my thoughts on something. So my response, which I had to rewrite, not in all caps with angry emojis, was something along the lines of this. Honestly, if you want my true opinion, let it burn. You know, I'm not sharing my response to ride off into the sunset on my high horse, But what I would like you to do is marinate on that as food for thought. I'd love to quote the entirety of this 7-minute monologue by Kimberly Latrice Jones, which maybe I will if acting and auditioning ever become a thing again. And, if I can convince the auditors to stay with me during the entire 7 minutes. Jones was caught on camera speaking with the utmost passion and eloquence in response to people talking about the looting and rioting. I will post the full video on our website. Jones said, and I promise you, I am not doing her justice, "How can you win? You can't win. The game is fixed. So when they say, why do you burn down the community? It's not ours. We don't own anything." Trevor Noah said it so beautifully last night. There's a social contract that we all have. If you steal or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and fixes the situation. But the person who's fixing the situation is killing us. So the social contract is broken. She goes on to say, "You broke the contract when you killed us in the streets. Far as I'm concerned, they can burn this bitch to the ground, and they are lucky that what Black people are looking for is equality and not revenge." The way that our lawmakers are moving in regards to writing and implementing change, it looks like we are going to be protesting for a while. Allow me to get a little on my soapbox here, but when we protest, we aren't really asking for much, but we are asking for everything. Our lives. We want to be treated fairly, with equality, with equity. When we call the police, we want the police to help us, not shoot us in the back, like in the case of Jacob Blake. In Wisconsin, a woman called police and said her boyfriend was present and not supposed to be on the premises. After Kenosha police officer Rustin Shesky, I don't know how to say his name, unsuccessfully used a stun gun to try to stop Jacob, a second officer, Vincent Arenas, used his stun gun on him as well. Jacob then walked around his car to open the front door and was leaning forward when Officer Shesky shot him in the back 7 times. The thing that stings perhaps even more than the actual event that took place between Jacob and the Kenosha police would be the aftermath. Following the shooting of Jacob Blake, Kenosha saw protests. Protests against the excessive force and abuse at the hands of the police. For me, the scariest thing at a protest are the outside opposition coming into the protest, uneducated about the cause, to create chaos. Kyle Rittenhouse is a 17-year-old who had his mother drive to the town and ended up murdering 2 protesters, Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber, and attempted to murder another. He has since been indicted with 6 counts in the 2 deaths and attempted murder. What I don't understand is what he and like-minded people are actually afraid of. They aren't the ones being killed. As basketball coach Doc Rivers said, "You heard Donald Trump and all them talk about fear. We're the ones getting killed. We're the ones getting shot. We're the ones getting denied living in certain communities. We've been hung, we've been shot, and all you keep hearing about is fear. It amazes me why we keep loving this country when it does not love us back." The topic of protesting is difficult and has many, many layers to it. I'd really love to cover every aspect, every catch-22, every cause and effect specifically surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement. It begins to be exhausting when every day there's a new cause, a new person, a new tragedy to demand justice for, but not nearly as exhausting as actually living it. Because this topic is so large, we wanted to bring in help. We're going to continue this conversation with a friend, Jenn, who is an activist and protester extraordinaire. We decided to split this protesting topic up in 2 parts. 1, because it's a lot and there's a lot of information to digest. And 2, because we have a really badass guest with us today.
Full badass. What up, Jenn? How are you?
Hi, so good. Well, good. This is like quarantine good,
Right.
Quarantine
Yes.
good and protesting good. And it's one of those, like, you answer it and you're like, am I?
Am I good? I'm alive. I'm alive is
Yeah.
really where we're at right now.
Exactly. That's all we can hope for, which is, the standard, and that's sad.
Amen.
Accurate. So everyone listening, we wanted to have Jenn on the podcast today because not only is she just a badass and actually falls into a lot of the topics that we've already discussed on our podcast, but also is a frontline protester consistently. Is a consistent frontline protester. And I know she's probably thinking, please don't right now, because she's also the first person to be like, yes, but look at these people and these leaders. Don't look at me. Right. But we really wanted to talk to her for many reasons. So Jenn, welcome. Let's start out with, can you tell us who you are and what you do and how you identify just as a person in general?
Sure. Well, my name's Jenn, as we've established. What I do is kind of all over the place right now. Mainly because, we're all in kind of an unemployed state.
Mm-hmm.
I used to work for a theater, which is how I know Emily.
Mm-hmm.
But right now I am being asked to do a lot of like graphic design work and social media work, which is like new for me because I've never been in a space where I've had been paid to be creative and also want to be creative in my free time. It's always just been like logistics focused career and then creative in the free time.
Sure.
So now kind of like balancing my creativity and seeing that as a form of resistance and protest as well is something new for me as well. But I identify as a Hong Kongese woman, to be differentiated from Chinese. I don't identify as Chinese.
That's right.
And I am Asian, but I don't identify as Asian American, even though I have a U.S. passport, because I do not want to be in that category.
That's right. Listen, you identify how you identify.
Yes, exactly.
I feel that heavily. I feel that.
Oh, and yes, straight cis woman.
Love it. Love
Thank
it.
you.
And are you also, I think you mentioned that you're also an adoptee?
I am. My mom is from Taiwan. My dad is from the U.S., so he's white. But then I was adopted in Hong Kong. So born, adopted, and raised in Hong Kong. So I kind of have like a melting pot in myself.
Yeah, that's beautiful. When did you make your way to Portland?
2015.
Okay.
But I went to school at Washington State in 2014. So I've been in the States for 6 years now.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm so lucky that our paths happened to cross. Like I'm just so lucky.
Jenn, I was wondering if you would be able to tell us just a little bit about your upbringing and your childhood. Like, what did that household look like when you were growing up in? I really want to know how you got so involved with activism. So was that something that happened when you were younger? Just tell me about your life.
Yeah. Okay. So I love this question because I was just speaking to an activist the other night and he had asked me something similar, just along the lines of like, why am I so invested in this movement? And that led to my upbringing. So I was super lucky. In Hong Kong, it really is just like a melting pot of international people and cultures. And I was fortunate enough to go to Hong Kong International School, which was a private American institution that my mom was a teacher at. So I got free tuition there. But if you don't have free tuition, you're paying like college tuition prices to go to that school. So I got a really great education, and very, very differently from, I think, a lot of public school systems here, which is something I learned when I got here, is we were taught and encouraged to like learn how to process and reflect when making decisions and answering questions. So like, for example, in my freshman year of high school, we had the choice between Humanities 1 and Humanities 1 in Action. And Humanities 1 in Action is like service-based learning. So we got to do a lot of service-based activities, and a lot of our papers and homework had to do with reflection writing over like pure history. So we would kind of like mesh the two together. So yeah, I was privileged. I very much took that for granted, I think. But they definitely keep me in a space where like I've always been like somewhat woke, if you really want to use that term, because of the like international cultures we've been around and how to address that and how to be, a respectful person. But I think the reason why I got so involved in activism through the Black Lives Matter movement is, one, because of the Hong Kong protests and how that kind of radicalized me in a way. And then especially in particular, the Black Lives Matter movement was something that I feel like helped me address my own racial biases that I did not know that I had. And I think a lot of people of color assume that we are exempt from having those biases because of our skin color.
Oh, girl. Yes, yes, yes.
And so that makes it harder to kind of like have that like epiphany moment in yourself to be like, oh wait, I have stuff to address. Just because I'm advocating for what seems to be quote unquote right, or what seems to be the right side of history, does not mean that I don't have work to do anymore. Like I'm still working on myself now, even though I've been on the front lines. And it helps me address like, you know, when I was radicalized in America, it was when I first stepped foot and realized like everyone's looking at me not because she's cute down the street, not because she's like someone that someone may recognize. It's because of the color of my skin. And so because of that, I was like, I feel that way as an Asian American. And even though we talk about how like the hierarchy of races doesn't exist, it does. Like if we're talking about privilege, the next race in line for privilege is Asian American and Asians, like especially because a lot of us have lighter skin. So
yeah,
especially in like the work industry, like we're always the ones who are looked at as smarter because of the model minority myth that of course doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist.
But because of that, I was like, I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing as an Asian woman in America, but I cannot ever imagine what it's like to be Black in this country.
Period.
Come on, intersectional ally.
Listen, she already gave us a whole sermon. I'm like, do we even need to keep going? Like, that's it.
My questions already.
Period.
I always end up like going on a rant and then being like, can I answer a question that's about to be asked anyways?
Girl, we love a good rant on this podcast.
Yeah.
So this is good. We're on our way talking about the protests in Portland. So there are probably some of our listeners who are not familiar with what has been going on in Portland. Portland has been on fire for months, right? Like y'all have been putting in the time, putting in the work. There's no backing down out in Portland. Would you be able to give some sort of like context of what's happening out there?
So the first Friday of protests, I was not actually out. That one was when looting was happening, and that's which, let me make that clear, is a justifiable and valid form of protest.
Period.
Yes.
Period.
Yes. That night, the government just didn't anticipate anything happening, so the federal building got tagged and graffitied. Also a great form of protest. So that night kind of like started the fire, right? That one was the ignition night, I would say. And then more marches started coming along. So my first march was the Sunday following that Friday. And a lot of those marches were huge. I would say maybe like 1,000 people to 2,000 people, led by an organization called Rose City Justice. This organization has now turned into one where we're like, oh, it's an organization that should not be named. But that, of course, this movement comes with a lot of internal conflict too. So what it looked like was a lot of marches led to a destination where they would have speakers lined up, which was great. They kind of saturated that space with a lot of Black voices and a lot of Black stories and a lot of Black educators. After that, there were quite a few people who would go to the Justice Center and just protest there every night. And keep in mind, I would say probably after the first week of protest, or not even, is when the tear gas really started being consistent. And tear gas, flashbangs, pepper spray, paper balls, all of it, rubber bullets, those were all utilized, especially at the Justice Center. And people stayed at the Justice Center, I would say, all the way up until when the feds came. And then those crowds got huge, like thousands of people would be out fighting the feds. And then the feds left, and then the numbers started dwindling. So it felt easy to get discouraged because you wanted to question like what people's intentions were in being there in the first place. And then when that started dying down a little bit, then another organization came about, and that's Safe PDX Protest, and they post direct action marches every single night. And that's kind of the organization that most of us have been following every night. And a lot of people tend to ask us like why we choose to protest at night. It's mostly for safety reasons, especially because I'm sure a lot of people have heard of black blocking. And if you're not familiar, that's when everyone dresses in black mask, black helmet, black ski goggles, black clothes to make sure we're like unidentifiable from each other. And we march at night because that way it makes it harder for the police to identify us. And on top of all of those evening events, we've had a lot of daytime events too. Every Thursday, there's a march for Patrick Kimmons, who was a man who was shot by the Portland police, I'm pretty sure 8 or 9 times in the back. And his mom comes out every Thursday and picks a place to march.
Okay.
No, this is good. I honestly,
Sorry.
I didn't know that name.
Didn't know.
There are so many. It's really hard to keep track.
Yes. There's so many names. You know, I mean, I'm learning so much. Like, Linnaeus is a great activist too. He puts on art therapy events where we literally just sit in a park and create art together. People paint, they make posters. People will donate their art so that it can be auctioned off later or like put in a gallery. Like, yeah, it's I think a lot of people see the violence, a lot of people see the warfare, and they think that's all people are out for. And yeah, there are a couple people who are probably out for that, but I think it's important to acknowledge the work a lot of the Black activists have been doing out here that are not intentionally violent.
Yes, that was my biggest, when I started to go to some protests out here in Minneapolis, I used to get so upset because all on Facebook, which Facebook is such a pit of despair. But on Facebook, it's just everybody's upset about, be careful when you go to these protests, make sure you all this kind of stuff. Who knows who's going to bring a gun and all of this stuff. And I remember specifically going to one protest for Jamar Clark, and I got there and it was like, there was a live band. There was people dancing. They had food everywhere for people and to make sure that they were okay. And I was like, what are y'all afraid of? Like, why are y'all hyping this up so much in the media to make us scared? We are already scared. Make somebody else scared for a change. Like, I don't need this.
Exactly. The people we need to be afraid of are the police and the Proud Boys. Like, those are organizations that we just will not trust. But when we're talking about going out to protest, the amount of mutual aid that has been out there is incredible. Like, I think the media makes it look like these protests are unorganized, but they're so intentional in the way that we move around. And this term "be water" actually came from Hong Kong, but the way that you move to like distract and confuse officers as to which way we're going, especially if we choose a destination and then move away from it. Like, the mutual aid is insane. We joke, but it's actually true. The amount of healthcare we're receiving on the front lines is better and free.
Period.
Don't.
The frontline medics at these protests are no joke.
Oh my God.
They're no joke. They're the real deal.
Yes. And they're putting their time, their effort, their energy into literally helping people, and for free. Hello, American healthcare for free.
Don't get me
I feel
started.
like I know, and like I'm unemployed, don't have healthcare. Like,
right.
I'm just like, let me just go to the front lines and get myself checked really quick.
Right.
that part.
Can you help me? I'm not feeling very well.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we there's never a night without water. There's never a night without snacks. Last night we had packet Kool-Aid. We had literally every kind of Dorito you could think of. Like,
I love Dorito.
We are blessed for sure, but you know, the amount of like, just, it's camaraderie, really. Like, everyone is there, maybe not for the exact same intentions, but we're all there for the same reason, like for the same cause.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. I'm curious to know, since we're still talking about the Portland protests, like, who are the people that you would say are actually there? Like you said, the healthcare workers, like, who is actually there? Because if the media is going to sit there and hype that it's just a bunch of people that are looting and trying to cause trouble, like, let's just set the record straight.
Yes. You will most likely see some of the same Black folks out there. I will say that probably doesn't rotate quite as frequently. But you also have to take Portland's demographics into play. It's, I believe, somewhere around 71% white. The next demographic in line is Asian. But I promise you, when you go out there, you will probably only see 5 Asians. And this is a crowd of maybe 200 is the average for a nightly protest. And the same Black activists who are out there every single night putting their life on the line. But the white folks that are out there, most of them are really great allies. They know how to check in on you, sometimes a little bit too late. But they do check up on you.
I want to talk about the joy. I want to talk about, if you wouldn't mind sharing, just some of like the most uplifting things that you've seen at the protest in Portland.
Oh my God. It's, yes, through the media. And I will even say through my stories, I try to share the Black joy, but the violence definitely outweighs it because it takes up more of our nights. There are nights when we're playing WAP and there are Black folks and BIPOC folks just dancing and marching and, you know, without police interference, that's all we're doing. Like sharing in that Black joy, like allowing Black folks to feel good about themselves and feel like they have people protecting them at the same time.
Yes.
And, you know, at these nightly marches, we've been out at the East Precinct on Burnside, and we literally, the other night, we were dancing to the cha-cha slide.
No.
Like, yes. Like, I mean, no, but because of the white people. But yes, it was hilarious. Like, there even a Black activist who retweeted it and was like, "Oh, I'm really impressed with all the white people on rhythm. Like, we're in different times right now."
I'm dead. I'm so dead.
Yes, we're in different times. They're learning something at least. Yeah, but I mean, the Black joy is it. I think the Black activists try really hard every night to bring that out. Like, and it's not necessarily about Black activists feeling like it should be fun. I don't think that is the intention. I think it's just like, we deserve this space. We always preach like stolen land, stolen people, right? So it's not their land, but they have been stolen and placed in a land where they were not chosen to be, or where they have not chosen to be. And I think they're just taking that space back and making it theirs and making it a safe space. I don't love that phrase, but safe space for them in that moment. But I think too, like last night in particular, and for the listeners who don't know, it was Breonna Taylor's, like, the stupid non-existent
indictment
sentencing of one cop, because apparently the walls are more victims than Breonna was.
The bullets that missed her are the ones that we're gonna indict. Correct. Not the bullets that hit her. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, totally makes sense. We were enraged last night, but in particular last night there was an activist who had said, yes, Black joy is important, but we're not here to have fun. And then another, last night we, in particular, the Black community wanted to feature Black women's voices, which was everything we needed I think we need it every night following this one, not just last night.
Period.
Yeah. We have a lot of strong male Black presence, which is important, but not always necessary. And of course, when a man took over, just yelled, "Are y'all having a good night?" And we were like, no,
what? No, we're not.
No,
actually, I'm pretty terrible.
Right. And he just kept going, and he was like, "We should be like thriving on this beautiful day." I was like, "Beautiful? Are you okay? Do you read the room?
Right.
Do you know what's happening today? Like, why are we here?" Right. And so, like, it's definitely those moments where you're like, I think everyone has different definitions of Black joy, but from what I've seen, it's definitely a time for them to like have a space to themselves. Like, yes, we can thrive in it too, and they're sharing that space with us. Thank you. But it's, especially white people, like, it's not for you.
We had so much more to talk about with Jenn, but we couldn't fit it all into one episode. Tune in next week to hear the second half of our interview with Jenn. For more information and protesting resources, check out our website at mixedmessagespod.com. If you like what you're hearing, give us a review. And if you haven't already, join our Patreon for bonus and exclusive episodes. See you next week.